All right, now we're going to be tackling another really appetizing subject, parasites. We have sometimes have patients who are exposed to parasites in various ways. And so on page 87 in our book, we start talking about antiparasitic drugs. And before we cover those, I have included a link to just a little video from ZDogg, who, if you are not familiar with him, is pretty educational and entertaining, if somewhat tacky. But he has done a little video on parasites, and I think it's kind of funny. So I have just included the link on this if you just want an amusing break for a couple of minutes. But we're going to be talking about 3 different types of parasites that we might need antiparasitic drugs for. And we start this discussion on page 87. And we have a table about antiparasitic drugs on page 89. And we'll be talking primarily about infections caused by various amoebas and protozoas. And the drugs for this are for both intestinal and extraintestinal, what's known as amoebiasis, or infection with parasites. Most of the parasites tend to start in the intestine and usually stay there, but they can travel to different body areas. And if you've ever watched that show, Monsters Inside Me, you can end up with some pretty interesting areas to find other types of parasites. The most common location for extraintestinal one-celled critters is the liver. We're also going to be talking about worms, talking about drugs that combat worms and helminthics for these various types of worms. We are fortunate enough here in the United States to many times not have a problem with that. But pretty much 2 billion people in the world, 1/3 of the world's population, has their life badly impacted by helminths, one or more of these various types of worms. And then the last thing we'll talk about is our drugs for malaria. Drugs for malaria will suppress the infection. Once somebody has been infected with malaria, will kind of keep the life cycle down, but will not cure it. Once someone has malaria, it can lie dormant inside them and pop up with symptoms from time to time. Here's a picture of an amoeba, very, very present in every lake, every river, every stream, any source of water that is not treated. That's why it's important that people know not to just go drink from any old body of water while they're out camping or whatever. And amoeba are one-celled creatures. As long as we don't bother them, they won't bother us. It's when we drink water that we can end up with a problem. A real common amoeba that can cause difficulties, and I have the page 170 up there, but I believe that is misleading. It's not in our textbook, so that is a mistake. So let's just not even pay attention to that. Bye-bye. So this is covered in your textbook, pages 87 to 89. One of the most common causes of amoebiasis is a medication or a amoeba called Entamoeba histolytica, and many times this is found in people who are traveling. They travel abroad, they drink water they're not accustomed to, they eat unwashed fruits and vegetables, and they end up with an intestinal amoeba. Primarily, they're going to be affected in the GI tract, but like we said, it can be located elsewhere, although it's more difficult to treat in sites outside of the GI tract. HIV patients, of course, are going to be more susceptible to amoebic and protozoal infections than a person with a more intact immune system. So there are some opportunistic infections that have their origins in amoeba and protozoas. So what we want are drugs that will destroy the invading amoeba and treat both intestinal and extra-intestinal amoebiasis. The drug given and the dosage of the drug is going to depend on the location of the drug. One very common protozoal infection that is sexually transmitted is called Trichomonas vaginalis, and this protozoa can be transmitted through sexual activity. Men can get it, but many times it's asymptomatic for men, but they transmit it to a female and they end up with a really, really nasty vaginal infection. Giardia is also a protozoa that's found in contaminated drinking water, and that can be transmitted easily, especially if you're immune compromised. We've probably all heard of the horror stories about the brain-eating amoeba. It's Naegleria fowleri, and I included an article about what's involved with that. Usually it's found in bodies of water, fresh water, not salt water, that never quite freeze enough to kill any one-celled creatures. And the danger of this is if you put your head under the water in a lake that is populated by this N. fowleri amoeba, it is extremely rare. The chances of getting it are very low, but since I've started reading about this, I will never again put my head under in a freshwater lake or anything, because it's pretty nasty, and only a couple of people have survived it. There is a picture of Trichomonas vaginalis. It's got these little flagellae that help it move along, and when it ends up in a body cavity, it makes a nasty infection. Common adverse reactions to amoebicides usually are going to be GI reactions: nausea, vomiting, lack of appetite. In severe cases, the person can end up with a hepatic abscess that's going to be harder to treat. Most of the adverse reactions are drug specific, and so education needs to be done for the particular drug that's given. So make sure that you read the nursing implications on page 89. It's possible to overdose on these meds, and people who take these medications are generally going to have just exaggerated versions of the existing adverse reactions. So if they overdose, they take too much medication, they get extremely severe GI symptoms. And so they need to stick to their regular dosages and take it as directed, like any other anti-pathogenic drug. The main interaction that we see is alcohol with metronidazole. Metronidazole is very commonly given. It's the drug of choice for trichomonas, and we just need to tell our patients, don't drink. So when we're assessing our patients, when we're looking at what's going on with them, we want to check out their current use of alcohol. Are they pregnant? Do they have existing organ disease like liver or kidney failure, which could affect how the drug is metabolized or excreted? And if they get severe nausea and vomiting, they might already have it because of the amoebic infection, like dysentery, but they're also going to possibly have GI distress from the drug itself. So we always want to watch out for signs and symptoms of dehydration. Patient teaching is found on page 88 as well as page 89, and the best thing to do to teach our patients is just wash your hands. Good hand washing, which is a good lesson for all of us at any given time.